The most stable elements, Clarice, appear in the middle of the periodic table, roughly between iron and silver. Between iron and silver. I think that is appropriate for you. Hello, you all. Hello, y'all. Hello, all of you. Thank you for joining me today. I've read a book, go figure. I read a book called Hannibal. Ever hear of it? By Thomas Harris. And I want to tell you a little bit about what I think, because it's a mixed bag for me. It's a book that a lot of people kind of downed it. I expected to be disappointed. But at a certain point in the book, I thought, damn, this is a good book. But anyway, let's go back into hair. Suntup Editions, one of the greatest publishers, Paul Suntup, Walking God's Green Earth, published the set of Thomas Harris limited edition Hannibal Lecter books, starting with Red Dragon, The Silence of the Lambs, Hannibal, and Hannibal Rising. So I read Red Dragon. I love the movie Manhunter, the Michael Mann movie. Man, I love that movie. Both versions, the original theatrical and the director's cut, for different reasons. But then, of course, The Silence of the Lambs. I love that movie too. Hannibal, that was a movie I saw at the theater. And I actually watched that movie for a little while thinking, wait a second, Hannibal is supposed to be this horrible killer, but he's just being Dr. Fell at this fancy place in Florence, Italy, like a curator of a museum, eating fine foods and talking to good people. And I was really disappointed in him until he decided to cut open Inspector Potsy's belly and have him hanging outside of the museum there for all the world to see. Then I finally thought, that's Hannibal, that's a villain. Anyway, and then Hannibal Rising, which I actually watched the movie for that, and the movie was okay. I just thought Hannibal for that movie didn't really fit for me. The way the character was portrayed in the film felt like somebody else. So it was a good movie. It just didn't seem right, the performance of Hannibal. But a good movie still. If I hadn't have seen the other actors playing Hannibal Lecter, I would have been just fine with it and thought of it as a good movie. Anyway, Red Dragon. I loved the book. I didn't really love the flashbacks. And I didn't like the end at all. I didn't like the way it left us. I won't get into spoilers, but I didn't like that. It seemed like it ruined the book for me a little bit. Didn't ruin the book, but it lost a little bit. Silence of the Lambs, better than the movie. I loved that book. Great from start to finish. Great end. I was able to kind of put Jodie Foster aside a little bit, although she did a great job. When I read it, I didn't quite read Jodie Foster as Clarice Starling, which that was good for me. And then I hadn't read Hannibal or Hannibal Rising, so I jumped in on Hannibal finally to get it read. And I'll say this, I like Clarice Starling better in the book than I did in the movie. I was able to put both actresses aside, and then going from The Silence of the Lambs to Hannibal, it felt like an FBI agent who was now 7 years of hard agenting, weathered, somewhat disenfranchised, battered and bruised, seen some bad stuff. It felt far more accurate going from here to here than it did in the movies. Of course, different actresses didn't help that part anyway. But anyway, reading the book Hannibal, I was expecting to be disappointed, and so I read this copy right here. That's not it. What copy did I read? Here, I read this copy. So I read a movie tie-in novel because I like movie tie-ins, but I also got this copy cheap. But it's got a picture of Sir Anthony Hopkins on the cover. I read it, and I actually liked the book quite a bit. But I'll tell you what I thought. At a certain point, probably 4/5 of the way through, I was saying, this is a great book. Let's just see how the end goes. Because in the movie, well, the movie was flawed. It was a good movie. And it got really, to me, dumb. And they kind of finished it off okay. So it was an okay movie, I thought. A good movie, good to okay, not great. The book, reading through this book, I'd say very, very good. about 4/5 of the way through. And then the part of the movie that kind of got to me, it was like pretty much like what the book said, but I liked reading it a little better than I liked seeing it. Anyway, but then the book came to the finish. And I don't want to spoil that. At the end of the video, I'll talk a little bit about the finish and how it was goofy. And I'll warn you, I'll say, whoa, spoiler alert here when I get there. But that's the copy that I read, and here's the copy that I collected from Suntup Editions. They make some beautiful books. This is their numbered edition. It's in a fancy slipcase here. It is signed by the author. Look at it's bound in this Japanese silk. Wow, it looks cool. Nice. And it is signed by the author, who doesn't seem to sign books very often anyway. Signed and numbered. Signed by Thomas Harris, Jason Mowry, who did the artwork. There are 350 copies in here. And it's illustrated. It's got a lot of illustrations throughout. And let's see if I can find one. There you go. Just an example of the illustrations in this book. But an amazing copy. Something I was very glad to get on my shelf. Now that I've actually read this book, I like it even more. So I was expecting the book to be not so great. A lot of people said not so great, although Stephen King said it was one of the scariest books, something like that, of all. I don't know where he got that from. I don't know what he was thinking. Maybe he was thinking of a different book, or maybe he wrote it before he read it. I don't know. But this is the copy that I read here. And the book starts off, if you've seen the movie, you kind of know how the story goes, although so much of the book is so much better than the movie. The characters are so much better, and there's a lot of stuff in the book that's not in the movie. Things that happen, such as that. But essentially, it's 7 years after Silence of the Lambs. Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs escaped, killed some people escaping, and he goes on to have a friend for dinner. Anyway, now he's in Florence, Italy. We'll get to that in a minute, as Dr. Fell. But the book starts off pretty much like the movie. Clarice Starling is working with the multiple different agencies to try to arrest this big-time drug dealer, Evelda Drumgo. And Clarice was chosen for the job because she'd brought Evelda in before. This is a dangerous lady. A lady that always has weapons hidden, that is not afraid to kill or hurt or do bad things. She also is HIV positive, and she keeps needles hidden, and she'll stick people with needles. And she's got a baby, and she carries that baby on her and uses the baby as a shield. And she does the same thing here in the story. In the movie, they screw up and alert Evelda and her crew what's going on and forces a shootout, and things go bad. In the book, Evelda's tipped off, so she's expecting him. And when Clarice steps out and tries to apprehend Evelda quietly, without violence like she had planned, it doesn't work. Things go awry. Evelda pulls out a MAC-10, shoots Clarice. Clarice at the same time shoots Evelda and kills her. And she's bleeding all over this newborn baby. Clarice is armored, and she goes to try to rescue the baby. The mom's got AIDS. She's bleeding all over the baby. So Clarice is a sensitive person. She goes to rescue the baby, gets the baby. They're at a fish market. She takes the baby to the fish market, gets the water, and tries to get all the infected blood off of the baby as fast as she can, hoping the baby doesn't get infected. But since not only was Evelda tipped off, the media was tipped off too. It's all on camera. And it doesn't look good for the FBI. They decide that Clarice Starling is the perfect scapegoat, so all the politicians' careers are not hurt, and they can continue on their trajectory of making money and gaining power and influence and all this kind of stuff. Clarice becomes the scapegoat. Now, Hannibal Lecter is Dr. Fell, and he's in Florence, Italy, and he's the interim curator of this library, some big family library. They say it over and over again. I can't remember what the name of it is. Should have looked it up. But he's the interim curator of this Capone library. I think it was a Capone library in Florence, Italy. The old curator is nowhere to be found. Dr. Fell knows where he's at. He knows for sure, knows very well where the old curator is. Now, there's also another fellow who's competing with Dr. Fell who doesn't deserve it for the curatorship. Meanwhile, Dr. Fell, Hannibal Lecter, same person. He's had some cosmetic surgery, so he doesn't look like a completely different person, but subtle changes to his face. You'll find in Red Dragon, Silence of the Lambs, he had 6 fingers, little bitty teeth. It always talks about his little teeth. 6 fingers, he's had that removed, surgically removed. So he does have scar where the other finger was removed. He looks a little different because he's had some cosmetic procedures done in, I think, Brazil, somewhere in South America he went to. I can't remember now. Looks a little different. He reads about Clarice's shame, that she's being blamed for all the bad things and she's being forced out. He writes her a letter, and it's his own sort of teasing, poking, prodding, a little bit mean, but finishes it off by showing some understanding of Clarice, and in his own way, perhaps a bit of encouragement, the way Hannibal Lecter does. But there's people that are keeping a close eye on Clarice Starling, on her mail, on her calls, bugging her house. She lives in an apartment. She lives in like a duplex with Ardelia Mapp. Maybe you remember her. And they share side-by-sides with a door in between. And that's like her close confidant, where she goes when she needs somebody to talk to or somebody to cheer her up. But their mail's being searched, their house is being bugged, their houses are being bugged and things like that. And naturally, the fact that now Hannibal is writing her a letter all of a sudden makes Clarice important again. Because there's this guy named Mason Verger. Mason Verger is the big dirtbag in this book. The bad guy that's the bad guy's bad guy. Born into wealth, power, influence, child molester. I think he might have killed children. It's bad things to kids. And when Hannibal was still a practicing psychiatrist, Mason was sent to him as part of he got off. He was caught messing with kids because of his power and influence. They got him off. And he had to go to treatment, therapy with Hannibal Lecter. Who knew? Well, Hannibal, though he is a bad guy, he doesn't like bad guys. He doesn't like that kind of a bad guy. And he drugs Mason Verger, this is years ago, drugs Mason Verger and manipulates him psychologically into letting the dogs eat his face. Oh, now Verger has survived, but he's on a ventilator. He's partly paralyzed. He has no face, so he has no lips, no eyelids. But he's rich. His parents died. He owns this big business. And between him and his sister, Morgan Verger, and he's got people like Cordell, who you'll read about here, another vile character, working for him. And one of his eyes doesn't work, and he has no eyelid on the other, so he's got this thing that's constantly spraying moisture into his eyes so he can see. He can't pronounce words right because he has no lips, so a lot of the consonants don't come out right. Cordell. But he's a bad guy. He wants Hannibal Lecter so bad because of what Hannibal Lecter did to him. And he's got the money, the power, the influence. He's got politicians in his pocket doing his bidding. And now he wants Hannibal back up, number 1 on the most wanted list. And he wants the FBI to exhaust all the resources they possibly can so that Mason can have him. They don't want him arrested. He wants him. He's got big plans for him. Mason has hired this guy, this family, to help organize this torturous end for Hannibal Lecter. And also hired a videographer to videograph it, to video it, record it, so that he can watch it over and over and over again when it's all come to fruition. And this bad guy that he's hired to help torture Hannibal and kill him finally has bred this special super pig race of hogs. breeding this type with that type to make them big and hungry for human flesh and have massive tusks and all this kind of stuff. And they're all set and ready for when he captures Hannibal alive. He wants the hogs first to chew off his feet, and then overnight, the bad guy can have his way with him. And then the next day, to finally let the hogs eat Hannibal's face. And then the rest of them. He wants them to feel that he hired even somebody to keep him alive overnight after this. So he's got this big plan. And there's a guy named Paul Krendler, very powerful politician. And he's the one that's pulling the strings for Mason Verger, crushing Clarice's career because he's already upset about her past success, having overshadowed him, taking arrests that he should have had, and all this kind of stuff. Paul's a bad guy. And in the movie, he was a bad guy, but a real goof. I think the book, he's less of a goof and more of just a bad guy. Although he's still a little bit silly, but he's a more serious character, I think, in a book. You hate him just as much, but not because he's a goof, but because he's a bad guy. So he's pulling the strings, putting Clarice in positions to try to force Hannibal out, to come and get her, to come and help her, so that they can swoop in and get him. And that's what a lot of the book is. There's an inspector in Florence named Pazzi, and he's from the family of the Patsy, and it talks all about it anyway. This inspector, he's got a beautiful wife with very expensive tastes, and he cannot afford to keep her in the lifestyle that she is accustomed to. Now, he had a dealing with Dr. Fell, and he figured out that Dr. Fell is Hannibal Lecter, and he's contacted Mason Verger, because Mason Verger put a massive bounty. If you don't report him to the FBI, report him to us. We'll pay you big money if we can get him alive based on your information. Inspector Pazzi decides to help so he can get the millions and millions of dollars to try to help get Hannibal to Mason so he can get the big money, keep his girl happy, and live that high life. Who doesn't want to live the high life? I don't speak Italian, though. So there's that story, and that's one of the, for me, this book by this point is fabulous. All of Clarice's stuff that she's dealing with, it feels so real, and I really like Clarice in this book. She's not so hateful and mean. She's still that good girl who wants the FBI to be good. She wants to do good. She wants to make the world a better place. But now she's been beaten down so much, she's lost her faith in the FBI. It's lost. And she's kind of just wanting to stay employed. She no longer loves the Bureau. She doesn't trust the Bureau. But she still wants to keep her job. She still wants to be able to do some good in there. And she accepts what they ask her to do. They put her on the Lecter case, hoping to flush him out. In the meantime, they just say, oh, you know what? Cut her off. Let Lecter come to her, and that becomes the plan. Now, there's other characters in here that weren't in the movie, and that's the big one being Morgan, Mason Verger's sister. She is a bodybuilder, and she takes steroids and stuff like that, and whatever, steroids, your body, your choice. But there's a clause that says she inherits a big pile of business if she produces a child in the trust. Now, she's a lesbian. She doesn't really want to get pregnant herself, I don't think. And she's also, because of all the drugs she's taken, she doesn't think she is able to have a baby anyway, even if she did try IVF or whatever the deal. Even if she did try, she can't. She seemingly can't. At least she believes she can't have a baby. She's got her partner, and she's got a plan. And Mason, her brother, has agreed, but he keeps putting her off, that he will provide the seed to impregnate Morgan's partner, her girlfriend or wife or fiance or whatever it is, so that she could have the baby. And when they do the DNA testing, it would be blood relative, so it would satisfy the demands of the trust to say that she provided a child. Mason strings her along and won't do it. And it's kind of disturbing, some of the things that they have done in the past. He's a bad guy, and he's done bad things to a lot of people in his life. So his demise is one that the reader is really looking forward to. But Morgan's a good character. She's not a good, she's a bad person, does bad things too. She's not the good guy, but she's a good character because her multifacets. And Barney comes back. You've seen Barney in Silence of the Lambs. You read about Barney in Silence of the Lambs. He's back. And he's working for a little while for Mason Verger. And he becomes like a gym partner for Morgan. And they develop this relationship that Barney kind of misinterprets. She doesn't like guys. But Barney thinks maybe she does at some point. Goes bad. He ends up getting fired and leaves. We see him again later on, though. Anyway, so Barney's pretty good in this book. He does a lot of explaining, kind of like in the movie. He helps to tell us what Hannibal told Clarice when they were in the Institute together, and Clarice was trying to get information to catch Buffalo Bill. So Barney was a really good character. And then Cordell, if you watch the movie, Cordell's kind of Mason Verger's assistant in everything. Well, in the book, Morgan does a lot. Cordell is more of the medical side for taking care of Mason. And this book takes a lot of steps to make Hannibal more of a sympathetic character, a good character. He's gotten away from doing bad things to good people. And all the people that he's doing bad things to here, you kind of get the impression that they deserve it, except for the curator of the... Anyway, they try pretty hard to make Hannibal more of a sympathetic character in this book, and it kind of works. They forget about some of his bad characteristics, and he sticks to killing people that need to be killed and things along those lines. And you root for him to kill some of these people in the book. And almost all the way through, it's a great book. And here's where I'm going to get into what I say, spoilers. I'm going to get into spoilers here. So, warning, spoilers. There's a scene in the book and in the movie where Clarice is now in a home. She's drugged up after being badly injured, being rescued from the hogs. She helped rescue Hannibal, and then he rescued her. There's a scene where she's drugged up in the house, and they're having Paul Krendler for dinner in multiple ways. And this part of the movie I hated so bad because it was so dumb and goofy and silly. But the movie was pretty much exactly like the book in this part. But reading it didn't seem as dumb and goofy and silly. Reading it felt a little bit more serious, I guess. Less goofy. Although it was quite a bit the same. And there was a spot in the movie where Clarice became the cop. And now she has to protect Krendler, even though it's too late. And she has to stop Hannibal. In the book, she doesn't turn that corner. She's drugged, but she is now sympathetic towards Hannibal. She wants she wants to eat Krendler's brain. She wants to be with Hannibal. And that's where it kind of gets weird. See, in the movie, I think it comes back. She snaps out of it. She's a woman that wants to do right, wants to do the right thing, even if it goes against what she wants. And that's the way Clarice had always been. But here in the book, somehow we're expected to believe, even under drugs and Hannibal saving her and all these things, that now she's willing to be with Hannibal and be like Hannibal. And when Krendler is killed, she is sort of set free to be like Hannibal, to be with Hannibal. And even after he keeps her under drugs for a while, and he's mentally working on her also. But once she's done with the drugs and the treatment and all that stuff, she stays with him. They go off, make love, have a wonderful life together. And they run into Barney. And that's how the book ends. Barney's like, screw this, I'm giving up, I'm out, I don't want nothing to do with those two anymore. But I think that's where the book goes off the rails. And so I'm left with a story that I liked a lot until the very end, and I couldn't buy it, and I didn't like it. So the ending is a complete flop. I can only compare it to the book It. Book It by Stephen King. You read that book and it's in places the greatest book that was ever written. It had parts that weren't so great until we got to the end, and it just, and that's what happened here. It just like that. So overall, I give the book 4 out of 5. 4 out of 5. It could have been a 5 out of 5. It was en route to 5 out of 5. 4 out of 5. The ending just blew it. Anyway, that is Hannibal. I still recommend the book. I really liked the journey. I enjoyed it most of the way through. And even the end isn't a bad read. It just doesn't feel right to me at all. Not that the girl would go off with the guy. It just goes against what Clarice is still. It's against her character, and I don't like it when a person's character is betrayed by the person. So there it is. That's my opinion of Hannibal. Thank you for your time. I do truly appreciate it. C'est la vie, baby. I got no more lies to tell.